Beatrice Vance thought she was untouchable. Standing in the center of the ballroom, under the glow of a $50,000 chandelier, she swirled her vintage Krug champagne and watched Annie weep. She smiled that cold reptilian smile as Annie held the gift Beatrice had insisted she open in front of 200 of Manhattan's elite. It wasn't the diamond necklace the box suggested. It was a petition for divorce, citing infidelity. Annie had never committed, signed by Beatrice's son, Annie's husband. Beatrice thought she had broken her daughter-in-law. She thought she had scrubbed the Vance family clean of Annie's common influence. But Beatrice forgot one crucial detail. Annie was the one who balanced the books. She didn't just gift Annie a divorce. She handed her the weapon that would burn her legacy to the ground. The air inside the Vance estate always smelled the same old money, fresh lilies, and lemon polish. It was a scent that used to intimidate Annie, making her feel like an imposter in her own home. But after 7 years of marriage to Liam Vance, she had learned to tolerate it. Or so she thought. It was her 35th birthday. The date, October 14th, 2023, was etched onto the custom invitations Beatrice had sent out. She had insisted on throwing the party. "It's a milestone, Annie," she had said, her voice dripping with the faux sweetness that usually concealed a dagger. "We must celebrate properly at the Greenwich Mansion." Annie stood by the grand staircase, smoothing the silk of her emerald gown. It was a dress she had bought herself, one of the few things she owned that Beatrice hadn't critiqued. Beside her, Liam looked dashing in his tuxedo, but he was distant. His eyes kept darting to his phone, his hand twitching at his side. He had been like this for months, distracted, irritable, blaming it on the merger with Sterling Corp. "Relax, Liam," Annie whispered, touching his arm. He flinched, pulling away as if burned. "I'm fine, Annie. Just Beatrice wants everything perfect." He never called her Mom in public. It was always Beatrice, the matriarch, the CEO of Vance Logistics, the woman who controlled their bank accounts, their home, and apparently their moods. The guests began to arrive. The Parkers from the investment firm Judge Arthur Miller, who had been on the Vance payroll in spirit, if not on paper for decades, and a host of socialites who looked through Annie as if she were a pane of glass. Then she walked in. Chloe de Winters. She was 24, an influencer, and the daughter of one of Beatrice's board members. She wore a dress that was barely legal in a church, and clung to Liam's arm the moment she saw him. "Happy birthday, Annie," Chloe said, her voice light and airy. She didn't look at Annie. She was looking at Liam. "Liam, your mother is looking for you." Annie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Thank you, Chloe." Our dinner was an elaborate affair of 6 courses, each more pretentious than the last. Annie sat at the head of the table opposite Beatrice. Liam sat to her right, Chloe shockingly seated directly next to him. Beatrice clinked her spoon against her crystal flute, silencing the room. "Attention, everyone," Beatrice announced, standing up. She looked regal, a queen addressing her subjects. "To my daughter-in-law, Annie, you came into this family with nothing but a suitcase and a degree from a state university, and look at you now." A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter went through the room. It was a backhanded compliment, her specialty. "I have a special gift for you," Beatrice continued. She signaled to the butler, who brought forward a heavy, velvet-wrapped box. It was the size of a jewelry case. "Open it, dear, in front of everyone. I want them to see how the Vance family takes care of its own." Annie's hands trembled as she took the box. The weight of it felt wrong. It was too light to be jewelry, too heavy to be nothing. She undid the ribbon. The room went silent. Liam was staring at his plate, refusing to meet her eyes. She lifted the lid. Inside, there was no velvet cushion, no diamonds, just a folded stack of legal documents. Annie pulled them out, confused. The header glared at her in bold black ink: petition for dissolution of marriage. She froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She looked at the papers, then at Liam, then at Beatrice. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's your freedom, dear," Beatrice said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "And ours. Liam has filed for divorce this morning, on the grounds of your indiscretions." Indiscretions. Annie stood up the chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "I have never—" "Liam, tell her." Liam finally looked up. His face was pale sweat beading on his forehead. "It's done, Annie. Just sign them. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." Annie laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. "Your mother just served me divorce papers at my birthday dinner. And for good reason," Beatrice interjected smoothly. She pulled a manila envelope from under the table and tossed it onto the white tablecloth. Photographs spilled out. Grainy, blurry photos of Annie entering a hotel room. Photos of her having coffee with a man. Annie recognized the man instantly. It was her brother David, who had been in rehab for 6 months. She had been visiting him in secret because Beatrice forbid junkies from being associated with the family. "Meeting strange men in hotels," Beatrice tutted. "Disgraceful." "That is my brother." Annie screamed, tears finally spilling over. "That is David. It doesn't matter who it is," Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion, reciting a script. "The prenup is clear, Annie. Infidelity, or the appearance of impropriety that damages the family reputation, voids your claim to the estate. You get nothing." Chloe de Winters placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. "It's for the best, Annie. Liam needs a wife who fits his future, not his past." Annie looked around the room. Judge Miller was studying his wine. The Parkers were whispering. No one moved to help her. She was the outsider. She had always been the outsider. Beatrice smiled, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." Annie grabbed the water glass in front of her and threw it. Not at Beatrice, she was too far away, but at the wall, shattering it. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice shaking with a rage she didn't know she possessed. "Both of you." "Security," Beatrice barked. 2 large men appeared from the shadows. Annie didn't let them touch her. She grabbed the papers, her gift, and walked out of the dining room with her head held high, even as her heart was breaking into a million jagged pieces. She left the mansion with nothing but the dress on her back and the envelope of lies. Beatrice thought she had thrown out the trash. She didn't realize she had just discarded the only person who knew where the Vance family buried their skeletons. The first 48 hours were a blur of cheap coffee and fluorescent lights. Beatrice had frozen Annie's cards before she even reached the end of the driveway. She had $60 in cash in her purse and a credit card. Beatrice didn't know about a low-limit card kept for emergencies. Annie checked into the Starlight Motel on the outskirts of Queens. It was a far cry from the silk sheets of the Greenwich estate. The room smelled of stale smoke and desperation. She sat on the lumpy bed, still wearing her ruined emerald gown, and spread the divorce papers out. They were thorough. Beatrice's lawyers were sharks. They cited the morality clause in the prenup. Because of the alleged affair, documented by the staged photos, Annie was entitled to 0 alimony, 0 assets, and she was effectively barred from the properties. She cried until she couldn't breathe. She mourned the loss of her marriage, the betrayal of the man she had loved for 7 years. Liam was weak, yes, but she never thought he was cruel. She realized now that his weakness was his cruelty. He let his mother hold the knife, but he was the one who watched Annie bleed. By the third day, the tears stopped. A cold, hard numbness took their place. She needed a job. She needed a lawyer. But who would go against the Vance family? They owned half the judges in the state. Annie took a job as a night auditor at the motel in exchange for a discounted room rate. It was humiliating, but it gave her time to think, and more importantly, time to dig. For the last 5 years, she hadn't just been a trophy wife. She was the one who organized Liam's chaotic home office. She was the one who synchronized his devices, and because Liam was lazy, he used the same password for everything Beatrice won. Annie borrowed a laptop from the motel's front desk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. If they had changed the passwords, she was dead in the water. She logged into the cloud storage Liam used for personal projects. Access granted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She began to scroll. Most of it was useless golf scores, emails to Chloe, which dated back 6 months confirming his infidelity, not hers, and receipts for expensive watches. But then she found a folder named Project Gemini. It sounded like a business deal. She opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, hundreds of them. Annie had a degree in accounting. It was why Beatrice originally tolerated her. Annie had helped structure the charity write-offs in the early days. She knew how to read a ledger. As she scanned the documents, her eyes widened. Vance Logistics was a shipping empire. They moved cargo all over the world. Project Gemini wasn't a merger. It was a shell company. The spreadsheets showed massive payments from Vance Logistics to Gemini Consulting for services rendered in Southeast Asia. But Gemini Consulting didn't exist. Annie cross-referenced the tax ID numbers listed in the invoices. They led back to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, and the sole signatory on the Cayman account. It wasn't Beatrice. She was too smart to put her name on the illegal siphoning of company funds. It was Liam Vance. Beatrice had set him up. She was using her own son as the fall guy to embezzle millions from the company shareholders to fund her lavish lifestyle and shore up her personal debts. If the SEC found this, Liam wouldn't just lose his money. He would go to federal prison for 20 years. But there was something else. A scanned PDF titled Codicil Grandfather. Annie opened it. It was a legal document from Liam's late grandfather, the founder of the company. It stated that in the event of a divorce, if the spouse, Annie, had been married to Liam for more than 5 years, 15% of the voting shares of Vance Logistics shares currently held in a trust controlled by Beatrice would transfer to the spouse unless the spouse was proven to be mentally unstable or a criminal. That's why Beatrice needed the infidelity story. That's why she needed the morality clause to stick. It wasn't just about saving money on alimony. It was about control. If Annie left the marriage with a clean record, she triggered the clause. She would own 15% of the company. She would have a seat on the board. Beatrice didn't just want Annie gone. She needed to destroy her reputation to keep her throne. Annie sat back in the creaky chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. They thought she was just a small-town girl who got lucky. They forgot that she was the one who proofread their contracts. She needed an ally, someone who hated Beatrice Vance as much as she did, someone with the power to fight her. Annie opened a new tab and searched for Marcus Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Corp., the rival company Beatrice was trying to merge with. He was known as the Wolf of Wall Street. Before the movie made the nickname a cliché, he was ruthless, brilliant, and according to the tabloids, had a personal vendetta against the Vance family, ever since Beatrice swindled his father in a land deal in the 90s. She found the contact email for his executive assistant. Subject: The Vance merger and the Gemini protocol. Dear Mr. Sterling, you don't know me, but I know where Beatrice Vance is hiding $6 million of embezzled shareholder funds. I also hold the key to stopping the merger you are hesitant about. I was Mrs. Liam Vance until 3 days ago. Now I am the woman who is going to hand you her empire. Meet me at the Starlight Motel Room 104. Come alone. Annie. She hit send. She expected a rejection or silence. 2 hours later, a sleek black Bentley pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Starlight Motel. It looked like a spaceship landing on Mars. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the motel itself. He had sharp features, piercing blue eyes, and an air of dangerous calm. Marcus Sterling. He knocked on her door. Annie opened it, still wearing jeans and a t-shirt. No makeup, her hair tied back. He looked her up and down, not with disdain, but with calculation. Mrs. Vance, I presume. Just Annie, she said, stepping aside. Come in, Mr. Sterling. We have work to do. He stepped into the cramped room, glancing at the laptop and the papers spread across the bed. You claimed to have information on Beatrice. I don't just have information, she said, turning the laptop screen toward him. I have the smoking gun, and I have a plan. Marcus looked at the screen, scrolling through the Project Gemini file. His eyebrows shot up. This is massive fraud. Liam is the signatory. He's the patsy, Annie explained. Beatrice is the architect. Marcus looked at her, a gleam of respect entering his eyes. What do you want, Annie? Money, revenge? I want everything, she said, her voice steady. I want my reputation back. I want my shares. And I want to see Beatrice Vance's face when she realizes she lost. Marcus smirked, extending a hand. Annie, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. The game was on. Beatrice had fired the first shot, but Annie was about to bring a nuclear warhead to a knife fight. Marcus didn't just offer her a lifeline, he offered her a fortress. That night, she left the Starlight Motel behind. She didn't pack her things. She left them in the trash bin. The old Annie, the one who clipped coupons and apologized for taking up space, was dead. Marcus drove them to the penthouse of the Sterling Tower in Manhattan. It was a glass sanctuary in the sky, overlooking the city that Beatrice Vance thought she owned. The guest suite is yours as long as you need it, Marcus said, tossing his keys onto a marble console. My legal team will be here at 8:00 a.m. Get some sleep, Annie. You look like you've gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Why are you helping me, Marcus, really? It can't just be about a business rivalry. Marcus poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed her one. He stood beside her, looking out at the city lights. 10 years ago, Beatrice Vance spread a rumor that my father had early-onset dementia. It tanked our stock long enough for her to buy a subsidiary we needed. My father died of a heart attack 6 months later, stressing over the company. She didn't just steal a deal, she stole his dignity. I promised myself I would wait until she was at her highest point to knock the ladder out from under her. He clinked his glass against hers. And you, Annie, are the saw. The next morning, the war room was assembled. Marcus's lawyers were shark-like, efficient, and expensive. Annie laid out the Project Gemini files, the grandfather's codicil, and the timeline of events. "The fraud is our nuclear option," the lead attorney, a sharp woman named Jessica, said. "But if we use it now, the company implodes, the stock goes to zero, and your 15% share becomes worthless. We don't want to destroy the company. We want to decapitate the leadership." "Exactly," Annie said, feeling a surge of confidence returning. "We need to activate the grandfather's clause first. To do that, I need to clear my name." "Beatrice has photos," Marcus noted. "Photos of my brother," Annie countered. "I need proof that the man in the photos is David. And I need proof that Liam and Chloe were together before the divorce filing. If I can prove his infidelity predates the filing, the morality clause swings both ways. It voids his protection against asset division." Marcus picked up his phone. "I have the best private investigators in the city. If Liam bought so much as a pack of gum for that girl, we'll find the receipt." Over the next 2 weeks, Annie underwent a transformation. Marcus insisted on it. "If you want to beat Beatrice, you have to look like you've already won," he said. He sent in stylists, tailors, and coaches. She cut her hair into a sharp, angular bob. She traded her soft floral dresses for structured suits in crimson, navy, and black. She wasn't dressing to please a husband anymore. She was dressing to intimidate a boardroom. While she sharpened her image, Marcus's PI team went to work. They found gold. Liam, being the arrogant fool he was, hadn't been careful. There were hotel receipts under his alias L. Vance, dating back 8 months. There were jewelry purchases sent to Chloe's apartment. And the pièce de résistance footage from a doorbell camera across the street from Chloe's apartment, showing Liam entering with an overnight bag 3 months prior. But the biggest weapon came from an unexpected source. David called her. He was out of rehab clean for 30 days. When she told him what Beatrice had done, using him to frame her as an adulteress, he was furious. "I'll testify," David said, his voice raspy but strong. "I'll walk into court and show them my birth certificate and the rehab logs. I'll prove I'm your brother." They had the shield. Now they needed the sword. "Beatrice is hosting the autumn charity gala next Friday," Marcus said, looking at an invitation on his desk. "It's the social event of the season. Liam and Chloe will be there. The board members will be there." Annie smiled, a cold, dangerous expression. "Then I suppose I need a date." Marcus buttoned his jacket, his eyes locking with hers. "I thought you'd never ask." The Autumn Charity Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a display of obscene wealth champagne fountains, live orchestras, and enough diamonds to pay off the national debt of a small country. Beatrice Vance held court near the Temple of Dendur. She wore gold, looking like a pharaoh. Liam stood beside her, looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. Chloe was draped all over him, wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, signaling her intent to the world. The room buzzed with gossip. Everyone knew about the divorce. Everyone had heard Beatrice's version that Annie was a cheating gold digger who had been cast out. Then the doors opened. The room went silent. Annie walked in. She wore a custom gown of midnight blue velvet, backless and striking. Diamonds, real ones, loaned by Marcus's family collection, glittered at her throat. But the real accessory was the man on her arm. Marcus Sterling, the enemy of the Vance estate. The most eligible bachelor in New York. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Annie saw Beatrice's jaw drop. Her glass tipped slightly, spilling champagne onto her golden dress. They walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Annie held her head high, smiling politely at the people who had shunned her weeks ago. Now, seeing her with Marcus, Seeing the power radiating off them, the guests scrambled to nod and wave. They stopped directly in front of the Vance clan. "Beatrice," Annie said, her voice smooth as silk. "Lovely party, though the floral arrangements seem a bit wilted. Budget cuts." Beatrice turned a shade of purple. Annie hadn't thought possible. "What are you doing here? You were not invited." "Mr. Sterling was," Annie said, tightening her grip on Marcus's arm. "And I am his +1. Surely you wouldn't be rude to Marcus Sterling. You're trying to merge with his company, aren't you?" Liam looked like he was about to vomit. "Annie, you look expensive," she finished for him. "I know. It's amazing what happens when you drop 180 pounds of dead weight." Chloe stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't be here. You're a disgrace." Annie turned her gaze to Chloe. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just looked at her with pity. "Oh, Chloe, you think you've won the prize, but you haven't checked the expiration date. You're sitting in a seat that's about to eject." "Security," Beatrice hissed, signaling the guards. Marcus stepped forward, his presence towering over them. "If you remove my guest, Beatrice, I walk. And if I walk, the Sterling-Vance merger talks end tonight. And I'll be sure to tell the press exactly why." Beatrice froze. She needed that merger. Her finances were a house of cards propped up by the embezzled funds from Project Gemini. She couldn't afford a public spat with Sterling. "Fine," she spat. "Stay, but stay away from my son." "Gladly," Annie said. Throughout the night, Annie worked the room. She spoke to the board members. She didn't mention the divorce. She talked about numbers. She asked pointed questions about the Southeast Asian Logistics Division. She asked about the Gemini holding company casually. She saw the confusion in the board members' eyes. How does she know about Gemini? Their expressions asked. That's a classified internal project. Annie was planting seeds of doubt. By the time dessert was served, 3 major shareholders were looking at Liam with suspicion. In the ladies' room, she cornered Beatrice. It was just the 2 of them. "You think this little stunt matters?" Beatrice sneered, reapplying her lipstick aggressively. "I will bury you in court. I have judges in my pocket." "And I have the spreadsheets, Beatrice," Annie whispered into the mirror, catching the older woman's reflection. Beatrice's hand froze. The lipstick snapped. "I know about the Cayman accounts." Annie continued, her voice barely audible, but hitting Beatrice like a sledgehammer. "I know Liam is the signatory. I know you're bleeding the company dry. And I know about the grandfather's codicil." Beatrice slowly turned to face her. The color had drained from her face, leaving her looking old and terrified. You're bluffing." "Try me," Annie said. "Drop the infidelity claim. Give me my 15%. Or I send the file to the SEC and you visit your son through a glass partition for the next 20 years. Annie turned and walked out, leaving her shaking in the bathroom. She had played her ace. Now she had to see if Beatrice would fold. Annie expected Beatrice to surrender immediately, but she underestimated the woman's malice. A cornered animal doesn't surrender. It attacks. The next morning, the tabloids ran a story. Scandal ex-wife of Vance heir investigated for corporate espionage. Beatrice was trying to flip the script. She was accusing Annie of stealing company secrets to sell to Marcus Sterling. It was a clever move. It explained why Annie knew about Gemini without admitting Gemini was illegal. It painted her as a spy, which would trigger the criminal acts clause in the prenup. "She's doubling down," Marcus said, throwing the newspaper onto the coffee table. "She's going to claim you hacked Liam's computer to steal trade secrets." "I did hack his computer," Annie admitted. Technically, you guessed a password while you were still married and living in the shared home, Marcus corrected. That's a grey area, but we need to stop this narrative before she gets you arrested. We need a witness, Annie said. Someone on the inside who can testify that Beatrice orchestrated the fraud and the divorce setup. Liam won't turn on his mother, Marcus said. No, Annie agreed, but Chloe might. Annie had been watching Chloe's social media. Since the gala, her posts had changed. No more happy couple photos. She was posting cryptic quotes about trust and lies. Annie did some digging. Beatrice, true to form, had presented Chloe with a prenup for her upcoming marriage to Liam. Annie managed to get a copy through a paralegal in Beatrice's firm who had a grudge against her. It was draconian. If Chloe gained more than £5 void, if she didn't produce a male heir in 3 years void, if she spoke to the press void, it was essentially a slavery contract. Annie knew where Chloe went for her Pilates class every Tuesday at 10 a.m. She waited in the parking lot. When Chloe came out looking tired and less glamorous than usual, Annie approached her. "Get away from me," Chloe snapped, fumbling for her keys. "Beatrice said you're dangerous." "Beatrice says a lot of things," Annie said calmly, leaning against Chloe's Range Rover. "Did she tell you about the breeding clause in your prenup? Or the fact that Liam is technically bankrupt and facing federal prison?" Chloe stopped. "What? Liam is the fall guy, Chloe. Beatrice is stealing money and putting it in his name. When the feds come, and they will, Liam goes to jail. And you'll be the wife of a felon with 0 assets, because Beatrice protected her own money, not his." Annie handed her a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of the Project Gemini summary and the draft of Chloe's own prenup with the brutal clauses highlighted. "Read it," Annie said. "Then ask yourself, do you want to be the next Annie, or do you want to be the woman who saved herself?" She left Chloe there, staring at the envelope. 3 hours later, Annie's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "He hits me," a small voice whispered. Annie froze. "Who, Liam? No." Chloe sobbed. "Beatrice. She slapped me yesterday because I wore the wrong earrings. She controls everything. Liam is terrified of her. He drinks to deal with it. I can't do this, Annie. I'm scared." "Come to the Sterling Tower," Annie said gently. "We can protect you." Chloe arrived an hour later, wearing sunglasses to hide red, puffy eyes. She sat in Marcus's office and poured everything out. She told them how Beatrice coached her to seduce Liam, how Beatrice set up the paparazzi to catch Annie with her brother, how Beatrice had threatened to ruin Chloe's father's business if Chloe didn't play along. "I have recordings," Chloe said, pulling out her phone. "I started recording Beatrice after she slapped me. I have her admitting that the photos of you were staged. And I have her talking about Gemini. She told Liam, 'Just sign the Cayman transfers, you idiot. I need to pay the yacht crew.'" Marcus looked at Annie. A slow smile spread across his face. "That's it. That's the nail in the coffin." "Not yet," Annie said. "We don't just want to win in court. We want to take the company." "There is an emergency board meeting tomorrow," Marcus said. "Beatrice called it to demand a vote to ban you from the premises and to approve the merger on her terms." "Perfect," Annie said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "Then I think it's time we crashed a meeting." "We?" Chloe asked, trembling. "Yes, Chloe," Annie said, reaching out to take her hand. "You're coming too. We're going to walk into that boardroom and show them exactly what the Vance dynasty is built on. The stage was set. Beatrice thought she was finalizing her victory. She had no idea she was scheduling her own execution. The boardroom of Vance Logistics was a soundproof chamber of mahogany and glass suspended 50 floors above the street. It was designed to intimidate. 12 men and women sat around the oval table. At the head sat Beatrice Vance, looking every inch the imperious queen. Liam sat to her right, looking pale and sweating through his shirt. Beatrice was in the middle of a speech. The merger with Sterling Corp has stalled due to external interference. We must circle the wagons. I propose a motion to completely sever ties with the former Mrs. Vance and to file a restraining order to prevent further corporate espionage. Seconded, said Judge Miller, Beatrice's pocket ally. Not so fast, a voice boomed from the doorway. The double doors swung open. Marcus Sterling walked in first, radiating an aura of absolute command. Annie followed her heels, clicking sharply on the marble floor. And behind her, trembling but walking forward, was Chloe. This is a closed meeting, Beatrice shrieked, standing up. Security, remove them. Sit down, Beatrice, Marcus said, his voice calm but loud enough to rattle the windows. We are here as shareholders, or rather representing the interests of a future major shareholder. You have no shares here. Beatrice spat. Actually. Annie stepped forward, placing a heavy banker's box on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I do, or I will in about 10 minutes. She looked around the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, you are being asked to vote on a merger. But you haven't been told that the company you are trying to save is being hollowed out from the inside. Lies, Liam shouted, standing up. She's bitter. She's crazy. Am I? Annie opened the box. She didn't hand out papers. She pulled out a flash drive and plugged it into the smart screen system on the wall. Beatrice lunged for the remote, but Marcus blocked her path. Let her speak, Beatrice, unless you have something to hide. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a video. It was the doorbell camera footage of Liam entering Chloe's apartment 3 months prior. Liam Vance filed for divorce on October the 14th, citing my infidelity, Annie said, addressing the board. This video is from July, proving that he was the one in breach of the marriage contract first, which means the morality clause in the prenup is void, which means, she paused for effect, I am entitled to 15% of the voting shares held in the Vance Trust, effectively immediately. A murmur went through the room. The board members exchanged worried glances. 15% was enough to swing any vote. It was enough to block Beatrice. This is personal drama. Beatrice scoffed, though her hands were shaking. It has nothing to do with the company's finances. Doesn't it? Annie clicked the next file. The spreadsheets of Project Gemini filled the massive screen. Gemini Consulting, a shell company in the Caymans, $6 million transferred in the last 18 months, authorized by Liam Vance. The room went deathly silent. This wasn't drama anymore. This was federal crime. Liam looked at the screen, his eyes bulging. I signed those. Mom said it was for tax optimization. She said the lawyers approved it. Shut up, you idiot, Beatrice hissed at him. She's throwing you to the wolves, Liam, Annie said softly, looking directly at her ex-husband. Look at the signature line. It's only you. Beatrice didn't sign a thing. When the SEC comes, who do you think is going to prison? The CEO who didn't know, or the CFO who signed the checks? Liam turned to his mother, horror dawning on his face. You set me up. I did what I had to do to save this family, Beatrice screamed, losing her composure. You were too weak to lead Liam. I needed the capital to keep us afloat because you couldn't close the Sterling deal. And there it is, Marcus said, crossing his arms. Admission of embezzlement. It's hearsay, Beatrice yelled. You have no proof I directed him. Actually, a small voice spoke up. Everyone turned to Chloe. She stepped out from behind Annie. She looked small, but her eyes were fierce. She held up her phone. Chloe. Beatrice's eyes widened. What are you doing? Get back in line. No, Chloe said. I'm done being your doll. She pressed play on the audio file connected to the Bluetooth speaker system. Beatrice's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the room. Liam is a moron, Chloe. He'll sign anything I put in front of him. We move the money to the Caymans, we declare a loss this quarter to lower the stock price, and then we buy back the shares cheap. If he gets caught, well, he's young. He can handle a few years in minimum security. The Vance legacy survives. That's what matters. The recording ended. Liam collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing, not out of remorse, but out of the realization that his mother, the woman he had sacrificed his marriage for, viewed him as collateral damage. Beatrice stood alone at the head of the table. She looked around, but no one would meet her eyes. Even Judge Miller was busy studying his notepad, distancing himself. I move for a vote of no confidence in Beatrice Vance, Marcus said clearly, and the immediate suspension of Liam Vance, pending an internal audit. Seconded, said the representative from the pension fund, a woman who had never liked Beatrice. All in favor. 11 hands went up. Beatrice looked at the hands. She looked at Annie. For the first time in her life, she didn't look powerful. She looked old. She looked finished. You, she pointed a trembling finger at Annie. You were nothing. A common accountant. I was the best accountant you ever had, Annie corrected her. You just forgot that accountants know where the bodies are buried. Security was called. Not for Annie. For Beatrice. As 2 guards escorted her out, she didn't scream. She just stared at Annie with pure, unadulterated hatred. Annie didn't look away. She watched Beatrice leave the room, and with her, the dark cloud that had hung over Annie's life for 7 years evaporated. The weeks following the boardroom coup were not a quiet slide into victory. They were a chaotic, televised war. Beatrice Vance did not go gently. She fought with the ferocity of a creature that had never been told no in 70 years. She hired a defense team that cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. She gave interviews from the steps of the courthouse, wearing oversized sunglasses and claiming she was the victim of a corporate vendetta orchestrated by that opportunistic accountant. But the evidence does not care about arrogance. The trial took place 3 months later in the Southern District of New York. The courtroom was packed. It was standing room only, filled with reporters, former employees, and the curious elite who wanted to see the lioness of logistics finally caged. Annie sat in the front row, Marcus beside her. His hand rested lightly on the back of her bench, a silent anchor. Beatrice sat at the defense table. She looked thinner, her skin possessing a grayish cast that no amount of expensive foundation could hide. But her posture was rigid. She refused to look at the gallery. She stared straight ahead at the Judge Harrison, a woman known for her distaste for white-collar nonsense. The prosecution's case was strong built on the forensic accounting work Annie had provided. But the nail in the coffin wasn't the spreadsheets. It was the witnesses. When the bailiff called, the prosecution calls Liam Vance to the stand. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Liam walked in through the side door. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. He had been denied bail due to flight risk concerns regarding the Cayman accounts. He looked terrible. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was shaggy and greasy. He had lost weight, his face gaunt and unshaven. He shuffled to the stand, avoiding his mother's gaze entirely. Beatrice stared at him. For a moment, Annie saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not love, but shock. She couldn't believe her own creation was about to speak against her. "Mr. Vance," the prosecutor began pacing slowly. "Can you tell the court who instructed you to open the Gemini consulting account in the Cayman Islands?" Liam gripped the edges of the witness box until his knuckles turned white. He swallowed hard. "My mother, Beatrice Vance." "Objection." Beatrice's lawyer shot up. "Hearsay." "Overruled," Judge Harrison said dryly. "The witness is a co-conspirator. Proceed." "She told me," Liam continued, his voice shaking, but gaining volume, "that the company was bleeding cash because of the failed Asian expansion. She said we needed a bridge to get us through the fiscal year. She told me to sign the papers. She said she couldn't sign them because as CEO her signature would trigger an automatic audit. She said I was safe. She promised me I was safe." He looked up, finally meeting Beatrice's eyes. "She told me that if anything went wrong, the lawyers would fix it. But when the subpoena came, she told me to take the fall. She said I was young enough to handle prison." Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. "You ungrateful coward! I gave you everything's order." The judge banged her gavel. "Ms. Vance, one more outburst, and you will be held in contempt." Liam didn't flinch. He looked broken, but in that brokenness there was a strange, jagged honesty. "You didn't give me everything, Mother. You took everything. You took my wife. You took my self-respect. And now you've taken my freedom." The jury was captivated. You could see it in their faces. They didn't see a rich heir. They saw a boy abused by a tyrant. When the verdict came down 2 weeks later, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and tax evasion. Beatrice didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply froze. As the bailiffs moved to cuff her, she looked back at the gallery. She scanned the faces until she found Annie's. Annie didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just nodded, a simple acknowledgement of the end. Beatrice sneered a final ugly expression before they led her away. That was the last time Beatrice Vance ever set foot in free society. A month later, Annie received a letter. It was from the Otisville Federal Correctional Institution. Liam had requested a visitor. Marcus asked her not to go. "He's the past, Annie. Let it stay dead." "I need to," she told him. "I need to see him one last time, to make sure he's really gone from my head." The prison visiting room was a stark contrast to the ballrooms where they used to spend their evenings. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. Annie sat on a metal stool separated from the inmate, signed by a thick sheet of scratched plexiglass. Liam walked in. He looked better than he had at the trial, perhaps because the anxiety of the unknown was gone. He was serving a 5-year sentence reduced for his testimony. Beatrice had gotten 20. He sat down and picked up the phone receiver. Annie did the same. "Annie," he said, His voice sounded tinny through the device. "Thank you for coming." "Hello, Liam. You look amazing," he said, a sad smile touching his lips. "I saw the Forbes article. The new era of Vance Logistics. You're CEO now." "Chairwoman," she corrected. "We brought in an operations specialist for CEO, but I hold the reins." He nodded slowly. "I always knew you were smarter than me. I think deep down that's why I let her treat you that way. I was jealous. And I was weak." "You were," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. "I'm sorry, Annie," he whispered, pressing his forehead against the glass. "I am so sorry. About Chloe. About the divorce papers. About David. I should have stood up for you. I should have been your husband, not her son." Annie watched him searching for the old anger, the burning rage that had fueled her in the motel room. It was gone. All that was left was a dull, distant pity. "It's too late for apologies, Liam," she said gently. "But I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. I can't carry the weight of hating you anymore. It's too heavy, and I have a company to run." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. Is there any chance?" She stood up. She placed her hand on the glass directly over where his hand was. "No, Liam. That Annie doesn't exist anymore. She died the night you handed her that box. Goodbye." She hung up the phone. She didn't look back as she walked out into the bright, blinding sunshine of the parking lot. She took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. The transition of power at Vance Logistics was brutal but necessary. Annie arrived at the headquarters the Monday after the sentencing. The lobby was quiet. The massive portrait of Beatrice that had hung behind the reception desk was gone, replaced by a modern art piece, abstract, chaotic, but vibrant. She took the elevator to the top floor. Her first act was to fire the entire executive suite. The CFO, the VP of Operations, the General Counsel, anyone who had enabled Beatrice or looked the other way, was given a box and 10 minutes to clear their desk. She wasn't interested in loyalty to the past. She walked into Beatrice's old office. It was a mausoleum of dark wood and heavy velvet. "Get rid of it," she told the facilities manager, a young woman who looked terrified of her. "Everything, Ms. Vance. Everything," Annie said. "Burn the drapes if you have to. I want light. I want glass. I want open space. And get this carpet out. It smells like lies." They rebranded. Vance Logistics became Vance Sterling Global. They implemented transparency protocols that would make a saint weep. They invited the auditors in, rather than hiding from them. One afternoon, Chloe came to say goodbye. She stood in the doorway of Annie's renovated office, looking like a different person. She wore jeans and a sweater, her makeup minimal. She held a suitcase. "Heading out?" Annie asked, looking up from a stack of merger documents. "Montana," Chloe said. "My aunt has a ranch. I need to be somewhere where nobody cares about my last name or who I'm dating. I need to figure out who Chloe is." She walked over to the desk. "I wanted to say thank you, Annie. You could have destroyed me. You could have put me in jail right alongside them. But you saved me. You saved yourself, Chloe," Annie said. "You pressed play on that recording." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Because you showed me I had a choice. Beatrice made me feel like a puppet. You treated me like a human." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "I found this in Liam's apartment when I was packing my stuff. I think he meant to give it to you years ago, but Beatrice probably told him not to." She placed it on the desk and turned to leave. "Take care, Annie. Win." "Always," Annie said. She opened the box. It was a locket. Inside was a picture of Liam and Annie from their college days, young and stupidly happy. She looked at it for a long moment, then dropped it into the wastebasket. She didn't need memories of potential. She had the reality of success. A year passed. The company's stock was at an all-time high. The merger with Sterling Corp was complete, creating a logistics juggernaut that dominated the eastern seaboard. It was the night of the annual gala, the same event where a year prior, Beatrice had tried to humiliate her. This time the mood was different. There was no tension, only celebration. The Met was bathed in soft, golden light. Annie stood on the balcony overlooking the Great Hall, a glass of vintage champagne in her hand. She wore gold this time, not to mimic Beatrice, but to reclaim it. Marcus stepped up beside her. He looked dashing in his tuxedo, the grey at his temples giving him a distinguished, predatory elegance. "You're hiding," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "I'm observing," she corrected. "There's a difference." "They're terrified of you down there," he noted, nodding at the crowd of socialites and business tycoons. "I heard the CEO of Trident say he'd rather audit his own taxes than negotiate with you." Annie smiled. "Good. Fear keeps the contracts honest." Marcus laughed, a warm, genuine sound that she had come to love. Over the last year, their partnership had evolved. It started as a business alliance, forged in the fires of mutual hatred for the Vances. But somewhere between the late-night strategy sessions and the quiet dinners in his penthouse, it had become something else. He respected her. He didn't try to control her. He didn't want a trophy. He wanted a titan. And she wanted a king. "I have a proposition," Marcus said, turning to face her. He set his glass down on the stone railing. "Business or personal?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Both," he said. "The board is pushing for a permanent consolidation of our personal assets to solidify the brand." She laughed. "Are you proposing a merger, Mr. Sterling?" "I'm proposing a life, Annie," he said, his voice dropping an octave. He reached into his pocket. For a second, her heart stopped. She flashed back to the moment Beatrice handed her the velvet box. The trauma was still there, a faint scar. Marcus saw the hesitation. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a key. It was an old iron key, heavy and rusted. "This is the key to the Sterling Vineyard in Tuscany," he said. "My grandfather built it. It's the only place on earth where I can't get cell service. I'm going there for 2 weeks next month." He placed the key in her hand. His fingers closed over hers. "I don't want a wife who stands in my shadow, Annie. I want a partner who stands beside me. Come with me. No lawyers, no shareholders. Just us." She looked at the key, then at him. She saw the vulnerability in his eyes, a risk far greater than any stock trade. "Tuscany," she mused. "Do they have good wine? The best he promised." She slipped the key into her clutch. "Then I suppose I should clear my schedule." Marcus grinned and pulled her close. As they kissed high above the city, they had conquered. Annie realized that the void Beatrice had left inside her was finally filled. Not with money or power or revenge, but with freedom. The next day, Annie walked into her office for the last time before her vacation. She stopped at the door. Hanging on the wall in a sleek black frame was the first dollar she had made as an independent consultant. But next to it, she had framed something else. It was the front page of the New York Times from the day after the trial. The headline read, "The Fall of the House of Vance," and below it, a smaller picture of her, leaving the courthouse head-high, sunglasses on. She took a marker from her desk and walked over to the glass of the frame. Beneath the headline, she wrote 4 words in red ink, "Long live the Queen." She grabbed her bag, turned off the lights, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind her, a solid, final sound. The story of the victim was over. The story of the victor had just begun. Beatrice Vance made the fatal mistake of confusing kindness for weakness. She believed that because Annie came from nothing, she would accept being treated like nothing. She thought that by stripping Annie of her marriage and her home, she would leave her destitute. She never calculated that she was stripping away the only things holding her back. The divorce papers were not a death sentence. They were a permission slip. Permission to stop apologizing. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to become the woman who could bring an empire to its knees. In the end, revenge wasn't about anger. It was about balance. Beatrice took 7 years of Annie's life. Annie took her legacy. It seemed like a fair trade. To anyone out there holding a box of broken promises, don't cry over the pieces. Sharp edges are dangerous. Pick them up and use them to cut your way out. Wow, what a journey. From a humiliated wife to a powerful CEO. If this story of ultimate revenge gave you chills, please hit that like button. It helps more people find our channel. Now I have a question for you. Do you think Annie was right to forgive Liam during that prison visit, or should she have refused to see him at all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new story coming next week about a billionaire who refused to pay his nanny and lived to regret it. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.